The moment I saw her marching up my driveway in her ridiculous sun hat and clipboard, I knew a storm was coming. "Mr. Nolan Zanders," she said, like she was reading my name off a court summons instead of the mailbox she'd passed 12 times that week. "Yes, Zelda," I replied, not looking up from my car hood. My '72 Chevelle didn't care about HOA drama. Zelda Carmine, our HOA president and self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, puffed up like a poodle in a thunderstorm. "You've installed security cameras." That's a direct violation of HOA Code 12.3. No visible surveillance equipment allowed on the exterior of homes in Willow Creek Estates. I wiped my hands on a rag and raised an eyebrow. "You mean the cameras I installed after someone egged my garage door 3 nights in a row?" "The same ones angled at my property. The optics, Mr. Zanders," she said, tapping her clipboard like it gave her divine authority. "It makes the neighborhood look hostile." "Hostile?" I laughed. "What's hostile is someone throwing eggs at my house while the HOA does nothing." Zelda cleared her throat like she was about to deliver a Shakespearean monologue. "You have 72 hours to remove them or face a fine of $500 per day." "Cool," I said. "I'll call my lawyer," she blinked. "Excuse me, you know, the one who helped me sue my last HOA for harassment. Won that case too." Zelda's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a goldfish trying to remember how to swim. She spun around and stomped off my driveway, heels clicking like a ticking time bomb. I didn't take the cameras down. I made sure every one of them was legal under state law and pointed strictly at my property. My lawyer, a guy with a memory like a steel trap and a love for HOA bylaws, confirmed it all. That didn't stop Zelda from sending official violation letters 3 days in a row. I framed the last one and hung it in my garage. Then came the night everything flipped. I was up late, working in the garage when I heard sirens. Red and blue lights bounced off the walls. I walked outside to see 3 cop cars parked in front of the HOA office at the corner of the neighborhood. Spray paint covered the front wall, windows had been smashed in, and someone had dumped a bucket of paint over the sign that read Willow Creek Estates HOA. The next morning, Zelda was on my porch again. "No sun hat, no clipboard, just panic, Mr. Zanders," she said, wringing her hands. We need to review your security footage. The HOA office was vandalized last night and your front camera might have caught the suspect." I leaned on the doorframe and crossed my arms. "Thought the optics were too hostile." "This is different," she said quietly. "It's a matter of security." "Oh, now it's about security," I said. "Funny how that works." She opened her mouth, probably to launch into some excuse, but I cut her off. "I'll think about it," I said. "Let me talk to my lawyer." "You know, optics and all." I closed the door before she could say another word, and that was the moment I knew I had her. The next day, I didn't bother opening the door when Zelda rang the bell again. I watched her on the monitor, instead arms crossed, foot tapping, looking like she was about to chew through the porch railing. She stood there for a full 5 minutes before finally storming off, muttering to herself. I went back to installing a new hard drive for the camera system. If they wanted footage, they were going to have to come correct. By mid-afternoon, I got a letter, not a generic violation notice, but one with a county sheriff's department seal. I opened it at the kitchen table with a butter knife. It was a subpoena. Turns out, the break-in at the HOA office wasn't just some local teen prank. Thousands of dollars had gone missing. The Community Improvement Fund, reserve maintenance accounts, and something called the Beautification Initiative were all drained. I hadn't even heard of that last one. The letter said law enforcement believed the vandalism was a cover-up for embezzlement, and they were requesting any footage that might help identify suspects. I called Detective Morales, the officer listed on the subpoena. She answered on the second ring. "This is Zanders." "You sent me a request for my security footage, Mr. Zanders. Thanks for calling." "Yes, we believe your system may have recorded the area around the HOA office during the time in question." "I've got the footage," I said. All high-def, time-stamped and stored on triple redundancy. But I have a question. Go ahead. If I hand this over, am I going to be forced to deal with your case through HOA channels first, because their president has been giving me grief over the cameras for weeks? Morales sighed. We're aware of some internal conflicts. The county's Financial Crimes Division has opened a case. This is bigger than neighborhood politics now. That was all I needed to hear. I uploaded the relevant clips to a drive and brought it straight to her office. No way was I going to let Zelda or her cronies touch the evidence before a real authority did. The next day, I mowed the lawn and waited. Sure enough, just before dinner time, Zelda came walking up again, this time with 2 other board members in tow. One of them was Dave, the treasurer, who always wore golf polos even though I'd never seen him swing a club. The other was Marla, the secretary, who was probably the only person in the neighborhood more obsessed with bylaws than Zelda. You've ignored official HOA correspondence, Zelda started, but her voice lacked the usual venom. She looked tired, nervous. I've responded appropriately, I replied. To the people who matter. Dave shifted uncomfortably. We just want to know if you've cooperated with law enforcement. I leaned against my porch post. You mean the same law enforcement investigating someone for draining the HOA's accounts? Yeah, I did. Marla spoke up, her voice unusually soft. Was anyone on the footage? I didn't answer right away. I watched their faces. Zelda was trying to keep her expression neutral, but her eyes flicked to Dave. He was sweating, and it wasn't from the heat. Marla, on the other hand, looked genuinely scared. Let me ask you something, I said. Who had access to the HOA office after hours? Zelda hesitated. Only board members with key cards. And who manages the financial accounts? Dave looked down at his shoes. That's part of my role, yes, but you didn't authorize any large withdrawals. No. I mean, we approve budgets together, but I let the silence stretch. The tension was thicker than axle grease. I've given the footage to the sheriff's department, I said finally. They'll be sorting out who was where and when. I'm not playing referee for this circus. Zelda's voice cracked. You could have come to us first. After 3 fake violation notices, after being told my cameras were a danger to the neighborhood, no thanks. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You brought this on yourselves. You tried to keep everything behind closed doors, and now the doors are wide open. They walked away without another word. That night, I sat in the garage with a cold drink, letting the quiet settle around me, but it didn't last long. Around 9:30, I got a call from Morales. We've reviewed the footage, she said. It shows someone entering the HOA office at 2:17 in the morning, keycard access. The person stays inside for about 53 minutes, then exits with 2 large tote bags. The footage is clear. It's your HOA treasurer, Dave? I asked, not surprised. Yep, he's already in custody. We've got enough for charges: embezzlement, destruction of property, possibly fraud depending on how the funds were moved. We'll be looking at the rest of the board's involvement too. Glad I could help. You did more than help, you blew the case open. The next few days were chaos. News vans showed up, neighbors gathered in front yards whispering. The HOA board resigned en masse, except Marla, who later told me she'd been kept in the dark about the financials. The county appointed an interim administrator to handle the HOA's affairs while the investigation played out. I attended the emergency community meeting in the park the following Saturday. Dozens of residents showed up, angry and confused. Morales gave a brief update, confirming that Dave had confessed to skimming funds for over a year. Zelda, it turned out, had been approving budgets without proper votes. Whether she'd been in on the theft was still under investigation. When Morales finished, a few neighbors asked how the whole thing had come to light. She pointed to me. Mr. Zanders' security system provided the critical evidence. People turned to look. A few started clapping. More joined in. I raised a hand, uncomfortable with the attention but quietly satisfied. After the meeting, a man named Curtis approached me. He was a retired contractor who lived 3 houses down. Used to think you were paranoid with all the tech, he said. Now I'm thinking of getting a system myself. Happy to help you set it up, I said. Curtis nodded. Guess you were the only one watching out for the whole street. And just like that, the guy who'd once been called a nuisance for putting up cameras became the one people trusted. Funny how fast the tide turns when the truth comes out. 2 weeks after the emergency meeting, things around Willow Creek Estates shifted in ways no one expected. The neighborhood, once obsessively micromanaged down to mailbox paint shades, now felt eerily unmonitored. With the entire board either under investigation or resigned, there was no one left to enforce the rules. Sure, a few folks tried to pick up the slack, but without authority, they just looked confused holding clipboards with no one to report to. I noticed the difference immediately. People started chatting in their driveways again. Trash cans lingered at the curb a little longer. Garden gnomes previously banned under some ridiculous clause about visual uniformity began popping up like mushrooms after rain. I was in my garage replacing the Chevelle's distributor cap when Curtis showed up again, this time with a lawn chair and a 6-pack. You see the listing for the HOA president's house? He asked, settling down. I tightened a bolt. She's selling, fast, didn't even hire a realtor. Just taped a handwritten sign to the inside of the window. Looks like she's trying to disappear. I wiped my hands off, stood up, and stepped outside to get a better look. Sure enough, Zelda's house sat dark, blinds drawn, car gone. The sign read, "For sale by owner. Cash offers only." She was trying to vanish without a trace. You think she's running from charges? I asked. Curtis cracked open a can. Word is, when the county combed through the HOA's records, they found some creative accounting entries, things like consulting fees to shell companies. Lot of money moved through her signature. Figures, I said. She spent more time obsessed with the length of my grass than where the money was going. Curtis leaned back. Morales told me the state might step in. If they prove the HOA was laundering money through fake projects, it's going to federal court. I didn't say anything, but the thought sat heavy. What had started as petty fines and neighborly overreach had unraveled into something far darker. Later that week, I got a call from Morales again. This time, she asked if I'd be willing to appear as a witness. Not in court yet, but at a state oversight hearing looking into the mismanagement of private residential associations. They want a first-hand account, she said. You're the only one who documented everything from the start. Your footage, your letters, even the timestamps on your HOA notices it's all been foundational to the case. I agreed, but not out of spite. If anything, I wanted to make sure something like this never happened to another neighborhood. The hearing took place in a government building downtown. I wore a suit for the first time in 5 years, which felt more like armor than clothing. The panel included 3 state commissioners, 2 county attorneys, and a representative from the state auditor's office. When they called my name, I walked up, passed through a metal detector, and took my seat at the witness table. Mr. Zanders, one of the commissioners said, can you explain in your own words what prompted you to install surveillance equipment on your property? I explained the egging, the lack of response from the HOA, and how I'd researched local laws before installing anything. I told them how Zelda had issued formal violation notices that contradicted state property rights. Then I described the night of the break-in, the footage I provided, and the fallout. The panel listened intently. No interruptions, no eye-rolling. Just pens scribbling on pads and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead. When I finished, the state auditor leaned forward. Were you aware that the HOA had filed a grant request with the county under the pretense of installing community-wide security cameras? My brow furrowed. No. That never came up at any board meeting I attended. According to our records, they received $15,000. Not a single camera was installed. The funds were withdrawn in cash over several months. I sat back, stunned. So they banned my cameras while pocketing money for their own. That's exactly what appears to have happened. When I left the building that day, I felt like I'd just stepped out of a courtroom drama, but this wasn't fiction. It was a slow-motion train wreck that had been smoldering for years. By the following Monday, the news hit local media. Headlines read, HOA embezzlement scandal expands to county level, former HOA president under criminal investigation, and my favorite, homeowners' security footage exposes corruption network. I didn't give interviews. Let the cameras do the talking fitting, given how it all started. Then came the letter from the county court. Zelda had been formally indicted on 6 felony charges, including wire fraud and obstruction of justice. Dave, the former treasurer, had already accepted a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. He'd provided emails, spreadsheets, and even a recording of a meeting in which Zelda instructed him to lose certain invoices from a landscaping company that, surprise, didn't exist. The part that turned my stomach. The funds weren't just used for personal splurges. Some of it had been funneled into political donations under fake names, possibly to curry favor for zoning changes. That meant this went beyond the neighborhood. There were city officials who might have looked the other way. Weeks passed. The interim administrator called for a full HOA restructuring, but this time, the residents had a say. At the next community gathering, held in the school gymnasium since the HOA office was now sealed off by police tape, people nominated new board members. No one wore suits. No one brought clipboards. Just neighbors, some with kids, some older, all tired of being treated like suspects in their own homes. Curtis nudged me when nominations opened. You thinking what I'm thinking? I shook my head. I'm not a politician, he chuckled. You're not. That's why you should run. I didn't raise my hand, but someone else did. Sandra, a nurse who lived on the opposite side of the subdivision. She'd been fined last year for having a healing crystal wind chime. Her speech was short but powerful. We need transparency. We need to stop treating each other like rule breakers. And we need to remember that we're neighbors first, not enforcers. She won by a landslide. That night, I checked the footage one more time before heading to bed, not because I didn't trust the neighborhood, but because it had become part of who I was. Someone who paid attention. Someone who didn't look the other way. The cameras stayed up. No one objected. 3 months passed, and the house Zelda once occupied now sat half empty with an overgrown lawn and a sagging cash offer's only sign fading under the summer sun. No one's seen her since the indictment. A neighbor said she was spotted boarding a shuttle to the regional airport with 2 suitcases and a purse that looked stuffed enough to hide a raccoon. The county froze her assets 2 days later. Curtis and I kept an eye on things from a distance. We didn't need to play watchdog anymore, now that the state had their sights locked on everything Zelda and her board had touched. But we still met in my garage once a week, usually on Fridays, just to talk. The new board had been sworn in, and Sandra turned out to be exactly what the neighborhood needed: no nonsense, fair, and refreshingly uninterested in whether someone's shutters matched their door. So get this, Curtis said one evening, popping open a ginger ale as he leaned against my workbench. My cousin works in the county clerk's office, said they found a second set of HOA books hidden in a filing cabinet behind a false wall. I looked up from the carburetor I was rebuilding. Another one, he nodded. Yup, this one had the real ledger. Not just the fake landscaping invoices stuff like hush payments. That caught my full attention. To who? Vendors mostly, couple of former residents. One guy got paid nearly $7,000 after he sold his house and threatened to report the board for denying his permit request unless he paid a compliance fee. I leaned back on the stool. So they were extorting homeowners and then paying them off to stay quiet. Looks like it. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up. Mr. Zanders? A woman asked, her tone clipped and professional. Speaking. This is Ada Juliet Lang with the district attorney's office. You were listed as a cooperating party on the Willow Creek Estates investigation. I remember, I said. We've completed our audit of the HOA's internal communications. We need to speak with you again. There's something we believe you can clarify. I'm listening. During the forensic audit, we found a deleted email chain between Zelda Carmine and a man named Kenneth Ralston. He's your neighbor, correct? He lives 2 houses down. Retired, keeps to himself mostly. According to the emails, he was paid under the table to file fabricated complaints against specific residents. You were mentioned by name. I stood, body tensing. He reported me. Yes, repeatedly. Mostly about suspicious activity on your property late at night. You mean me tuning up my car and watching the driveway? That's our assumption. But here's the issue: Ralston was being paid directly from an account labeled Community Stability Initiatives. It was presented to the board as a discretionary fund for neighborhood improvements. I ran a hand through my hair. So Zelda used HOA funds to bribe someone into targeting me. We believe it was part of a broader pattern. Several residents received anonymous complaints that led to fines or permit denials. We're preparing to file conspiracy charges. Let me know what you need from me, I said. I'll testify. We already have your footage. What we need now is a formal statement identifying the pattern of harassment. You're one of the only residents who kept records. I'll give you everything I've got. We scheduled a meeting for the following morning. When I hung up, Curtis raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, he said. Things just got deeper. I told him what Lang said, and he whistled low. Man, that explains a lot. You remember last year when Ralston tried to get me cited for running a table saw at noon. He tried to report me for putting out garbage bins too early at 6:01 p.m. He's got a vendetta, or had one. Wonder what they offered him. Doesn't matter anymore. We're going to bury the whole thing under so much documentation they'll need an archaeologist to dig it out. The next morning, I met Lang at the county office. She looked like someone who hadn't had a weekend off in 6 months. Sharp suit, hair pulled back, eyes like a hawk. She laid out the emails, payment receipts, and an annotated list of every false report Ralston had submitted over the past 2 years. My name came up 7 times. We believe Carmine used him to weed out residents she saw as problematic, she said. Anyone who pushed back, questioned fees, or tried to attend meetings without being on her approved list. That's the thing. She always ran those meetings like a private club. Lang nodded. We're charging her with conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of community funds, and obstruction. Ralston's being charged as a co-conspirator. I signed the statement, reviewed the final draft, and walked out with a copy in my hand. The building felt colder than it looked, sterile, humming with quiet tension. But I felt lighter with every step I put between me and that office. By the end of the week, the district attorney held a press conference. Zelda's charges totaled 9 counts, including 2 felonies. Ralston had already turned himself in and was reportedly negotiating a plea deal. The DA's office estimated over $100,000 had been misappropriated. A few days later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a short note. I was wrong. I see that now. I didn't know how far it would go. It was unsigned, but I recognized the writing. Ralston had always written in blocky capitals like he was afraid of cursive. I folded the letter and tossed it in a drawer. Sandra scheduled a community meeting the following weekend. This time, it wasn't about rules or policies. It was about healing. She stood in the front of the elementary school auditorium, microphone in hand, and said what everyone was thinking. We let a few people weaponize power against us, and we paid the price. But we're not going to let that happen again. No one argued, no one shouted, they just listened. At the end, she opened the floor for proposals. People had ideas, real ones. A neighborhood watch managed by volunteers. A transparent online portal for board decisions. Quarterly financial audits run by a third party. Simple, smart, and honest. When the meeting ended, a few people came up to me. Some I barely knew. One guy, Jeremy, I think, lived on the far end of the street, shook my hand and said, "Thanks for not backing down." I just said, Someone had to keep the cameras rolling. The new board passed a motion 2 weeks later formally recognizing the legality of private security systems on residential property. They even set up a registry for residents who wanted to opt in to share footage in case of crimes strictly voluntary, with consent forms and data protection clauses. Curtis finally put up his own cameras. He asked me to help with the wiring, and we spent a Saturday on ladders and rooftops, laughing like we hadn't in years. The neighborhood isn't perfect. It never will be, but it's not afraid anymore. The fear of fines, of retaliation, of quiet threats made behind closed doors, that's gone. And as for Zelda, she pled not guilty. Her trial date is set for late fall. But with Ralston flipping and the paper trail etched in stone, no one's betting on her walking free. Sometimes I still get emails from neighbors asking for advice on how to set up their own systems. I help when I can. Not because I want to be the guy with all the answers, but because I remember what it felt like to be the only one willing to question authority. We built something stronger from the ruins of control, not just a better HOA, but a better neighborhood. And all it took was one camera, a few late nights in the garage, and the refusal to be intimidated by a sun hat and a clipboard.